We are in part 3 of this series, which we're calling Entrepreneuring the Homefront. Part 1, we talked about reclaiming the role of family. That's the goal. Part 2 is having the best week of your life. That's the tool. Part 3 is about Shabbat rest. Shabbat is the Hebrew pronunciation for the word Sabbath. So it's kind of like redundant, I guess, because I think it means rest. So this, as we've looked at our life and, you know, wondered how have we got here, or when some people have talked to us and they're like, man, help me understand your family. There's no way to explain who we are or how we got here without the importance of this specific holiday and how much it's impacted us. So that's why we're going to spend a whole day devoted to this, or a whole talk. And if you've watched our vlog, you've probably heard bits and pieces of this. There's a lot of emphasis. Hopefully you'll find something new and helpful. And if you're new here, then I really hope that this idea, we could do a good job of summarizing it. Man, the sunlight is so beautiful.
Yeah.
Coming through here. You guys want to see it real quick? I think if we have a minute, I can show it to you. We see like the Cincinnati skyline out there. Can you guys see that, kind of? Wow. It never looks as good as it does in real life.
Mm-hmm.
Our family first went to Israel in 2009? 2010. I had never been before, didn't quite know what to expect. One of the things that stood out to me the most, though, was watching this entire culture, how they acted on Friday and Saturday. And what we saw was Friday morning, we would come out of our little apartment thing that we were staying in, and there was these like kind of like outdoor steps that would go up the apartment, and this person would be like mopping them like clean. Like, this is outdoor concrete, so it's not really like, you know, and this is the Middle East, Israel, it's not like the cleanest place. So it's just kind of funny, like, oh, these things that would never be cleaned in America, like at least mopped clean, seemed like you could like eat off them. And that happened like every Friday.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd go off to work and I'd be like sitting there in a coffee shop, and then all of a sudden it'd be like, the internet would just shut down. And I'm like, oh crap. And I'd look at my watch and it's like 3 p.m. And I'm like, dang it. Mm-hmm. So I'd be like running home to try meet Cammie, and I'm like going on this main street where there's all these shops, and the shops, the doors are like closing, like they're pulling down those like big metal things that go in front of them, and everyone's like sweeping like crazy. And all I can tell you is it felt like Christmas Eve, like when you haven't done any shopping, you know, for Christmas, but it's Christmas Eve and everything's closing down. And for a while, we didn't get the hang of this because
we're not used to that.
Yeah, and then like,
we're used to being able to like get whatever we want whenever we want.
Saturday comes around and we like don't have any food, and we're like, well, we're hungry, but there's like no place to eat except for like the Arab restaurant like across town that we didn't even know existed. But everything's like closing. So we like Saturday, what it looks like is we would go out and it was like a ghost town. It's hard to explain because you never see anything like this in America. There
weren't cars driving on the road. Maybe you would see an occasional taxi cab or something, but
really no taxis either. No buses.
Yeah.
Nothing.
And even people, at least for Friday night, eventually everyone's at home. Like no one's even just walking around, really.
But then Saturday you see families walking around, but still like no cars. And then Saturday night would hit, and the way Shabbat starts and ends for Jews, I think, in Israel, is that there's this one star that becomes visible in the sky. So it varies seasonally, but it was around like 8 p.m. This star would hit, and then like everything would open up and people would flood the streets, and it was like party time. The pizza parlors were packed, the ice cream places were packed, the shopping districts were packed with like young kids and families, and everyone's just like out there because like Shabbat is over. I remember walking down this like tiny street in the middle of this residential area, it was like the middle of nowhere, and this like jeweler stand was like open, like in the middle of the street, and I was like, why are they open? I think it was like just because they could be, like Shabbat was over. It didn't like make sense.
Yeah.
And then Sunday morning at 6 a.m., you go back to the coffee shop and it's like, boom, like work is on. Like it's going 100 miles per hour again.
Yeah.
And it was just this fascinating cultural thing to observe.
Yeah. It's kind of like Sunday is like our Monday there.
And what I saw was that, you know, Jews in Israel took one day off and then they had 6 days on. And in America, I think what we've adopted is like 5 days on and then 2 days that are like, you know, they're like off-ish.
Yeah, but what I've seen is that the typical American kind of does a ton of activities. Like, for example, on Saturdays with their kids, like they'll just do like soccer and basketball and like all this stuff. And then if you're like a church-going person, then Sunday you go to church. And I don't know about you, but going to church has never been a restful thing for me.
And Saturdays and Sundays are also about like yard work and mowing the lawn and socially catching up with people and going to birthday parties.
Yeah.
And all these things that are really great things, or at least they can be, but it's very much non-restful. And what we found is at the end of a weekend, we would be like exhausted. It was kind of like a different kind of exhausted maybe than working for the man. But nonetheless, we were like worn out.
And you're like worn out before your week's even begun.
Well, and I think that's one of the things I noticed was back in American week, like before we celebrate Shabbat, there was not much of a difference between where one week ended and another week begun. Like the best thing was like the standard work week. So like Monday morning, that was like kind of what made the week begin.
Yeah.
But there was no official ending. Like it's kind of Friday night when you get home, but I don't know. I guess that's one of the benefits that we've noticed now. There's a very clear ending and it's like, oh, we start over and we do it again. And I don't know, that was like, I don't think I realized how much I appreciate that now.
Yeah. Because
we never had that at one point.
Yeah, our young kids, Filia, who's 6, she'll ask, when does Shabbat start? Has it started yet? And I'll say, oh, 1 more hour. And then she'll ask, when is Shabbat ending? Is it ended yet? And I can tell her, oh, it's gonna end in 30 minutes or 2 hours. But for her, it's like, when do I get candy? When do I not get candy anymore? But still, it's cool that she like has this like beginning and ending.
And I think that piggybacks on yesterday's lesson of having a good week. Like, it's good to have a beginning and an ending of a week. So anyways, I'm in Israel, and we had like tried practicing Shabbat before, and we had been to some families that were doing it, and they said these like Hebrew blessings that I didn't really understand, and just like quit working. So we like tried variations of this, and it was really hard.
Yeah.
And when I was in Israel, I had this opportunity to meet this guy from like my favorite venture capital firm that I had like read about, and kind of like, you know, these guys were my heroes. And I met this guy in Jerusalem for a coffee, and this was like, I mean, he was a big shot. Like, these were the guys that backed eBay, and I don't know how much he was worth, but I'd be really doubtful if it's less than $10 million. You know, probably more. And he's flown all over the world and done all these crazy business deals. And he was Jewish. And when we got to talk about Shabbat and how they celebrate. And he said, you know, for the 10 years that I've worked for this venture capital firm, I have missed Shabbat with my family at home 0 times. I've never missed. And I was like, whoa. I mean, this guy was like my business hero. But I think for some reason I felt like you have to choose. Like you have to choose between making a lot of money and being social or successful, or you give it all up to like be religious and practice Shabbat, but you can't have both. And this guy had really like proved to me that at least it was possible. When we got back from Israel, we kind of started again practicing Shabbat, and I think this time it looked a little bit different. We had a bunch of small kids back then, but we decided this is important, we want to try it. And at first I remember like, well, the first thing was like, we're like, okay, we're gonna do Shabbat, we're gonna make an amazing dinner. What's the first thing we should do? And we're like, I know, let's invite 3 or 4 of our closest family friends
who also have a bunch of
a ton of tiny kids to our house. So we did that, and then...
Which was like normal for us. That's
what we always did.
Yeah.
And it took a while before we realized every time all these people leave, who we love to death, we were like completely exhausted. And it was actually like the least restful day of our entire week. Mm-hmm. So then we're like, oh, I don't think we should do that. But it felt like we were ruining something. Mm-hmm. But I think that was when I first realized when you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else. Mm-hmm. And we had always said yes to social interactions. We had always said yes to our children's activities and friendships. But every time we did that, we were saying no to rest. So we kind of canceled all that stuff. Which
felt like a huge loss. Like it felt like a huge cost for us because, I don't know, we just didn't value rest that much yet. We didn't know how to value it.
And every time we said no, I think we like felt it. We were like, oh man, we're giving this thing up. And it was like this big giant choice.
Yeah.
But the way we did it was we started eating Chinese food in our house for dinner, carry out. Mm-hmm. And then we'd sleep in and we'd light a fire on Saturday and we'd all hang out in the same room with no electronics, wearing our pajamas. That was it. Mm-hmm. And it took a while to get used to it, but then the kids started playing instruments and playing Legos. Mm-hmm. And we started reading, and it just was like, oh, okay, this is possible and cool. Mm-hmm. But still what was happening for me, I didn't really get it. I didn't know why are we doing this. And in fact, at that point, I think Shabbat was more work than it was rest. Because this is what I noticed we're doing. We're taking 7 days of work, so you have to chop one off. So then you take 7 days worth of work and you squish it into 6 days.
Yeah.
And that became really tedious and it was like really hard. And I don't think we, like I said, I don't think we understood why we're doing this. Right around that time, I remember reading this Tim Keller book. It's called King's Cross. And it talked about Jesus's interaction with the Pharisees and what he said about Shabbat. And this is what changed my whole perspective, and this is what kind of led us to the way that we practice it now and the very practical belief system that we have. Mm-hmm. And it goes something like this. I'm just going to share what we might say on a typical Shabbat, especially when we have new people on a Friday night before dinner. So we like to point out how in the actual creation story, the first chapter of the entire Bible, after creating, God rested. And we like to ask the question, why did God rest? Like, have you ever thought about that? Was he tired? Mm-hmm. You know, was he worn out? Is that why we should rest on the 7th day? Because what if you're not worn out? Maybe you shouldn't rest. Sometimes I don't feel worn out.
Yeah.
But the clue is actually in the text. And you see why God rested based upon how he responded to what he did in that 6 days. He looks back and he said, "It is good." And another way of paraphrasing this is to say, "It is good enough." We like to tell our kids that on the 7th day, he could have made flying dolphins. Like, he could have probably done more. But in looking back and declaring it good enough, that's what gives him the ability to stop on the 7th day and not be productive. So one of the things we do is we go around in the group and we ask, hey, who's done any work this week? And the most typical work that people talk about is what we call the work of the hands. So this is like, hey, I made $10,000, or I wrote a bunch of emails, or I built a shed, or I did some laundry, or I responded to email, or I cleaned up the kitchen, or I took care of my sister. This is all hard work that we do with our physical bodies, and it's all really good stuff. But then we ask the question, did anyone like really finish their work? And by finish we mean like so that you never have to do it again. And we find out really quickly that most of this work, it never finishes. Mm-hmm. You know, there's always more email, there's always more laundry, there's always more money to be made, there's always more, you know, stuff to do. And then we ask this other question, which I think is the more difficult question, which is there any work that we left like incomplete this week that we didn't finish? So this is like, you know, I didn't call my friend up. I didn't make as much money as I liked. I actually failed at this. I didn't get to all the things I wanted. The house is still a mess. And this is really important because I think one of the biggest lies is that in order to rest, you need to finish your work. Like, we actually need to do the finishing, which never ever comes. And in fact, the second type of work that we talk about, which is the work of the heart, this is a lot more subtle, but I think a lot more important and a lot harder of work, which is the work that any of us do to try and feel like we're a good person or a good enough person. So this is like, you know, what did I do to try and feel like a good dad this week? What did I do to try and feel like a good husband or a good friend? And what work do we do, and what work is still incomplete or did we fail at? And let me tell you, that list gets really real, you know, because I never feel like a good enough son, husband, father, and friend. I feel like there's more I should have been done, you know, more people I should have contacted. So really, the ultimate question we ask, which I think is so important because it's the underlying question, for me at least, is if we didn't finish our work, how can we get to rest? Why shouldn't we be working right now? And this is what I think really separates Christianity from what I know about any other religion, which is all religions teach that you have to do good stuff to get good stuff. That's like a very basic understanding of what religion is. So it's really, really disruptive and controversial to speak like another answer. But we believe that Christianity offers a different answer and a different solution, and that comes in the person of who Jesus is. So the story of the Bible is this, that there was a man, the first man named Adam, that represented all humanity. And he was put on earth, and he had the potential to do good work, but he failed at it. And because he failed, we all suffered for that. So we needed a second Adam that could represent us. And we read in the Bible that the person who took that identity was Jesus. He came down as a second Adam to represent us. And he is the only person on earth that actually did the fully and truly good and perfect work that he set out to do. The work that the first Adam could not do. And he lived this life that was actually perfect. And there's this like whole story of the cross that's like kind of confusing, and it's always been confusing for me. But the reason why that story is really important, that he had to die and needed to be bloody and all this, was because that's the act that needed to take place for his work to transfer onto us. So that when God looks at us, he sees the work of Jesus. Or, you know, the way the Bible phrases it, it's really this kind of like gruesome, weird image that we're covered in Jesus' blood. I don't know if you've heard songs or hymns or that idea. But what Christians are really saying is that blood that covers us, it's the merit that Jesus accomplished, that when God sees us, he literally doesn't see our incompleteness or our lack of work or our lack of productivity. He sees Jesus' work. And it's that that gives us the ability to look at our 6 days and say to each other very specifically, you are good enough. You don't have to do anything else. You don't have to make any more money or send any email or do any more laundry or be a better person. You can actually just stop and rest. And that really, I think, was the message of Jesus more than any other message, was that he came to bring a religion of rest. Now, I think we turned it into a religion of work so that we feel like, oh, okay, I was a good American, but then I became a good Christian, so now I have to be more honest and more this and more that and more of that. And I think those things, if you picture them, you know, at this retreat that we did this talk at originally, I actually took a guy, it was kind of weird, I was like, hey, do you mind if I touch you? And I was like, you know, picture like a weight on your shoulder. You know, so it's like, okay, here's being a good dad. Okay, here's being a good worker. Now these are like good things, but they're heavy.
Yeah.
You know, each of them weigh us down. And what Jesus said was, come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Because I am rest. He is rest. He is Shabbat. The whole reason why we celebrate this is because Jesus, who is this like abstract figure that's like really hard to understand, like we don't even know what he looked like there's these stories from 2,000 years ago that describe who he was, but once a week we get this very, very tangible holiday that I can't think of a better way to like get to know who Jesus is and why we need him and what our relationship with him looks like than to stop doing the things that make you feel valuable. Because what Christians believe is that what Jesus did and who he is, that's what makes us valuable, not what we do. But it's so hard to do that. Like, if you try Shabbat, if you try resting for like one day, 24 hours, I think early on, we found the things that like crept in, like, oh, okay, well maybe if I just answer my phone really quick, whether it's for money, then I realize, okay, I still can't turn this thing off. Or,
oh, the dishes are piling up. I should probably clean these real quick. I'm still guilty of that.
Yeah. Then it's like breadcrumbs or clues to find out what we're finding our identity in. And I think for our family, that's what we started to use as the benchmark to decide what our rest needed to look like. Those were the things that we needed to quit. There was no like magic code for us. Like when we went to Israel, it's like really crazy, you guys, like the code that the Jews live by, in my opinion. And I say crazy, I don't mean like lunacy, but I mean it's very strict. You know, there is an elevator that all the elevators go into like Shabbat mode, and they stop at every floor because they believe that it's work to push the button, so you shouldn't have to push the button. And the toilets don't flush and things like that, which, you know, that fits their belief system because they don't believe that Jesus actually has paid that price. And that like really speaks to, you know, Jesus' last words on the cross were like, it is finished. The work is done. And as a believer in Jesus, like what it looks like for us to live into that and to fully believe that, it is so damn hard that I think once a week to try and remember this, I think God knew how hard it was. And yet how important this concept of, you know, finding our identity outside of our merit, how unintuitive and difficult and important it is, that's why he made it like it's the only weekly holiday instituted in the Bible. And there's other holidays, but none that are weekly. So we teach our kids the reason why it's weekly is because it's the most important holiday of the year. It's so important it happens 52 times a year. Christmas happens once. It's great. But this is more important.
It's very natural, I think, humanly speaking, to want to find your validation in what you can do. So it's a hard thing to kind of have to rewire your brain and your heart almost to believe this different thing, that actually I don't have to do that anymore. And I think it's something that took us years and years to even like scratch the surface of that, to where now as I'm hearing Ben speak this, I'm like, I do believe that, but I like believe it like this much. And it took like many years for me to believe it this much, but I actually think believing it this much is huge, is like will totally change your life.
And this is where I think some of the Christian faith traditions and environments that we were raised in really failed us. Because the world teaches that work is who you are. That makes sense. But in a way, the Christian environments we were exposed to, they taught the exact same thing. They in fact made it more strict because there's a higher standard and work ethic for Christian criteria. So instead of making it about from work to rest, it was actually like work and then more work. It was just like Christian and spiritual work. Mm-hmm. So this becomes, it really is like, I think it's the most controversial thing we've ever believed. I mean, when I was talking to these guys this last weekend, I was like, you know, who does this or who's ready to try this? And it was like, I could tell that their hearts were there, but there's kind of like crickets in the room too, because it's like, this is so out there.
It's controversial even for the Christian religion.
And it's one of the 10 Commandments. You know, this isn't like, we didn't invent this stuff. I feel like, you know, when I played blackjack, I had more people coming to me asking for me to play blackjack than Christians in my lifetime who have asked me how to learn and implement a day of rest. I bring blackjack up and they're like, whoa, sweet, can you teach me? And I bring up rest and they're like, whoa, isn't that like Old Testament or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think people actually think that we're trying to heap more rules on them when it's actually supposed to be
it's like so the opposite. Yeah.
But I get it. Like when we first started, it felt like a rule or this like religious thing, because I think that was the only category that we could put it in.
So right now though, it is something that we crave as a family. And I missed one this last weekend because I was traveling. And I don't have the like hang up. I still feel a little bit like it's easy for me to turn it into a rule. But I'm not trying to go for 100% a year here. Like we just try and make a conscious decision. Is this worth sacrificing this for? And usually what we've concluded is that it's not.
Yeah.
So I feel like we probably celebrate probably 48 of them a year. Like maybe we miss 4, 1 a quarter or something like that if we're traveling on a weekend or holiday. You know, it's not like you're a bad person if that happens. It's not how we feel. But it gives us so much life now. And really more than anything, and this is why you guys were putting this in this section, and is I think the practice of Shabbat has done more to create our family culture than anything else that we've done. Because in a way, when you know that you can take a break from your work, it changes why and how you work. And before, work never felt optional to me. And now it does. Because one day a week we take it off, and it changes. What I didn't realize was when you take that 7 days and you squish it into 6, it actually becomes a celebration of productivity and efficiency. And Shabbat was never meant to be a celebration of our own productivity or efficiency. It's actually a celebration of our complete lack of productivity. That's like where the word grace comes in, is we're taking on the productivity of someone else when we actually don't deserve it. And that becomes the actual miracle or secret sauce of Shabbat.
Shabbat starts for us Friday night around 6 o'clock. We have some kind of fancy dinner, but we usually make it like pretty low impact. Like you don't have to prepare a ton of stuff, but we make it fun. So sometimes we order in pizza, Sometimes we just do like a fun, like we've been doing Reuben sandwiches recently. We just try to do something fun with it.
Because that's like my favorite thing. So really we're looking for, what's your favorite thing? What's the extra mile? If you don't drink soda pop that night, drink soda pop. If you don't do dessert normally, do dessert. If you normally do burgers, do steak. Whatever, like that's kind of where we started, was being willing to invest a little bit of extra money and time in doing it. And I think actually it might be valuable to hear that Shabbat starts actually ahead of time for us. You know how we walked out that Friday morning and those people were sweeping the stairs?
Yeah, so Friday day, myself and the kids have their Shabbat chores. So this is like our deep cleaning day. So we try to get the house prepared and just feeling kind of nice, so that when we enter into Shabbat, we feel like, oh, this is a restful place to be.
Which I think that time helps prepare our hearts and our minds, and it just tells us this is important. It's just like if you had guests coming over or the day before Christmas, you're like, you know, you're doing stuff.
Yeah.
So then...
So, and I'm just realizing too, well, so before dinner, we talk about Shabbat. Like we talk about what it is, and kind of what Ben was just saying about like asking those questions. We do that, and we kind of prepare our hearts even for, this is Shabbat, and what is it? What are we entering into right now? And a lot of times we'll do communion as a family. And after dinner, we clean up, we have dessert, clean up. And then what our tradition is, we go and watch a movie together upstairs as a family. And we actually have bought like our favorite movies just for this purpose. And
we allow the kids to eat candy, kind of like whatever candy they want. So we're a little bit like strict on the diet and sugar type of things. Not compared to some people, but we have our own standards.
Yeah.
Where we're constant in this battle of like, you know, watching carbs and watching sugar and trying to be careful. But this is a great opportunity for us to just not observe those rules.
Like rest on the rules. Like,
yes, as long as it's not breaking the law or doing any like permanent damage that's irreparable, you know, it's just saying, hey, work is good, but don't do it on this day. And even these codes, we realized we were finding a certain degree of identity in them. You know, if we don't drink soda pop or eat fast food, maybe like on Shabbat you need to eat fast food, you know, or eat candy or drink some pop or do something that breaks the rules inside of you just to experience that, you know, because work is a funny thing. Like sometimes living in the right way is a form of work. So that, like, we're trying to rest from really all of that in a way. And I find incredible peace, and Jesus made the statement when the Jews came up to him, or the Pharisees, that were saying like, hey, you guys are breaking the rules. And he said to them, he said, man isn't here for Sabbath, but Sabbath is here for man. Meaning like, you know, this is God's gift to us to help teach us these lessons. So if it's not teaching us, it's actually missing the point. So if you think you're following something, but you're not getting the essence out of it, you're actually not even really getting it. Like Shabbat is a gift for us. It's not a heavier yoke or standard.
So then Saturday morning, we have a special breakfast. So we'll do like once a month.
We sleep in.
Oh yeah, we sleep in. Once a month is my favorite. We get these special donuts. Other times we'll do like scones, or Ben will make these waffles. And we'll just have like a really fun, relaxing breakfast.
And we'll sit there with coffee in our pajamas around the table. And I don't know, it's just like we don't have anything planned that day, so there's nothing to like move on to.
Right.
So everything just has this like pace about it that's just like slower.
Yeah.
Eventually we might move into the living room, and this is where we've had a lot of changes. We'll have changes where we'll all sit around the table, or during the winter we all sit around the fire, or during the summer we like move out to the porch. But some through lines that are pretty common is like we all try and stay generally together. Like we don't go up to our room or, you know, we don't like all split up. So we kind of want to like keep some sort of like common culture. We try and minimize electronics. So I don't know why, but just something about, I feel like there's a work there and checking notifications and having to keep up on feeds that we're trying to detox from a bit.
Yeah.
We end up doing a lot of like hobbies, things that give us life and that we appreciate, but don't really add something directly to our life. Like we don't make money off these things.
Yeah.
So on Shabbat, we can invest time into those things, learning guitar. For me, I spent, you know, a couple of years working on my handwriting and calligraphy, reading, catching up on books.
Yeah.
But you have to like guard your heart. Like if you're reading because you feel like you need to like catch up for some class, one might feel like work and one might not be, even though it's like the same book. So
yeah.
And then at some point, Cammie and I will go up to our room. This is where we have like probably the best sex of the week, where we prioritize this time, and we take a shower together, and then we kind of clean up the house and the downstairs, and then we'll get dressed into our regular clothes, and then we leave the house, and that's like the breaking of Shabbat for us. And we have a whole video where we go through all of this, and we'll link it at the end of this video if you guys want to see what our, just one picture. But I don't mind sharing it with you guys as long as, like, you know, we're not claiming this is the blueprint for people.
This has just worked for us.
So what we've learned, you guys, is that all the work in the world is worthless if we can't rest from it. Because then it becomes our master and we become a slave to it. And we don't want to have that type of relationship with work. We think work is actually a good thing, and we want to do it to the best of our ability, serving the Lord and getting pleasure from it. I think that's possible. So we're going to end off with these same things that we've had in the other talks, which is a question for you guys. And that question is, what would keep your family from resting one day a week? I would love to see you guys be honest about that with yourselves. And if you want to leave a comment below, we'll read all the comments, because I think that's an important question to address. If you can't do this, you're gonna see kind of like what your God is or what your identity is if you're not able to rest. And that's just, this isn't to make you feel like shit, like, or be like, oh, you're not a Christian, or you're not like us, you're not good enough, whatever. But it's actually to have a clue and to be honest and face reality and to be like, oh, I serve that relationship, or making people happy, or feeling like I make enough money, or whatever it is. I think the first step to freedom is acknowledging that truth. The conclusion that we arrived to with this whole thing is that rest is God's curriculum to help us understand the gospel. You know, we hear this phrase all the time. Johnny Cash used to always sing it, like, the gospel, the gospel, the gospel. Well, the gospel is actually good news. And news is very different from advice. Advice, even the best advice, will always make you feel more heavy. If I was to tell you guys, oh, here's 18 ways to have a better family or do better parenting, it might feel good at first, but then you're gonna leave and be like, okay, I need to go do these things. But news, it actually changes you. So if I say, you know what, here's the news, your mortgage is paid off. You're gonna be like, oh my gosh, and you're gonna go like tell people, and you're gonna feel different, and you're gonna feel lighter. And the news is, you don't have to work to get the credit of God's approval. Like, that's the news. And I don't know of a better way to understand and live into that than by practicing this. It is a discipline at first, but I think pretty soon it becomes a pleasure. And the action step is very simply, what the phone just went off. I would love to see each of you start by practicing one day of rest and just see what happens. See what you learn. Don't beat yourself up about it if you find out that it like sucks, or that your kids ruined it because they squawk all the time, or it wasn't really as restful as you thought, or you didn't say enough Hebrew words or whatever. Like,
and make a list of what does a restful day look like for you? Because that's going to be different from person to person.
Yeah, it's...
Because some people actually might find rest in going somewhere. And there's nothing wrong in that. Like, if you're actually truly finding rest in that.
One of my favorite Shabbats this year was when we went to Central Park in New York. Because we were staying in this tiny 3-bedroom apartment with my parents and all our kids.
Yeah.
That had like a living space the size of what you can see on this camera. And we were like, get us the heck out of here. And we went to Central Park, and I don't know, it was not restful to get there.
Yeah. And there may be like, your day of rest might look like maybe only an hour of that day was restful to you, but that's a start.
I think it's worth it. I think it's worth it to figure out, because it's the only thing that's unique from work. Every other brand of work is still just work.
Yeah.
And if we can't figure out how to rest, I think we will actually literally work ourselves to death.
And I actually believe too that you're not going to actually find true fulfillment in your work unless you know how to rest from it.
Yeah. So this is what our family says, and you'll hear this phrase a lot if you go to Israel, is Shabbat Shalom, which means rest in peace. And this is something that Americans put on their gravestones, right? It's like R.I.P., rest in peace.
Or better, or maybe a better is like retirement when you're like 60.
Because like what we've believed is that like the only way you can fully find rest is after you die. But we believe that you can find rest while you're still alive, and when you're working, there's a way like to not just rest, but to rest in peace. Means you're not just like thinking about what you're going to do tomorrow or what you didn't do yesterday. So there's that. Hope this helps you guys. This has been one of the most life-changing principles that we've been attempting to practice. We're on about year 10 now of at least trying it. So please don't get discouraged. It takes all sorts of creativity, and I would love to hear discussions pop up in either our Facebook discussion group or the comments or in your own communities about how can we rest. Because this is like where we could really use community and dialogue. Yeah. How do you deal with 2-year-olds and 4-year-olds in childcare? And what if one person likes to go out, one person likes to stay in? What if we're strapped on for cash? Like, those discussions are worthwhile. But I think there's so many discussions on just how to be more productive and how to do better work, like parenting tips and this and that. And that's like interesting, but it's like, at the end of the day, it's still just like, it's just work. Yeah. Cool guys, thanks for watching this. This is the end of this 3-part series. We'll be back tomorrow with not a regular vlog at all, but more normal than this. Please let us know what you guys thought about this whole series in the comments, and if you guys have any stories about rest. Let's say we'll end off with our Shabbat greeting, even though it's not Shabbat.
Okay.
Shabbat Shalom.